She didn't know that one last act of kindness would change everything forever. Emma runs through the rain, holding the hand of a lost little girl, while her job slips away with every passing second. "Are you taking me home?" The trembling voice echoes in the cold wind. Sometimes, helping a lost soul is the price we pay to find ourselves. But is it worth losing everything for a stranger? If you've ever felt like doing the right thing cost you too much, this story will touch your heart. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join me on this emotional journey. The rain hammered against the pavement like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop echoing Emma's racing heartbeat as she clutched the small hand in hers. Her department store uniform clung to her body, soaked through and wrinkled, but that didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except the frightened little girl beside her, whose wide brown eyes looked up with a trust that both terrified and strengthened Emma. The city streets blurred past them as they hurried through the storm, Emma's worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs above. She could feel her phone buzzing incessantly in her pocket, probably Mr. Carter wondering where the hell she was. "You're gonna take me home, right?" Lily's voice trembled, barely audible above the thunder that rolled across the grey sky. Emma squeezed the child's hand tighter, her heart breaking at the vulnerability in those words. She'd found this little angel wandering the aisles of Henderson's department store just 20 minutes ago, lost and crying, calling for her daddy. Every instinct screamed at Emma to take her to the customer service desk, to follow protocol, to let someone else handle it. But one look into those tear-filled eyes, and Emma knew she couldn't just pass the buck. Not this time. The store's neon clock glowed mockingly in a shop window as they passed. 3:47 p.m. Emma's shift wasn't supposed to end until 6, and Mr. Carter had made it crystal clear that leaving early meant losing her job. But here she was, racing through downtown Seattle with a stranger's child, her employee badge bouncing against her chest like a countdown timer to unemployment. Her mind raced faster than her feet. "What am I doing? This is crazy. I need this job. Mom's medical bills won't pay themselves." Yet every time doubt crept in, Lily's tiny fingers would tighten around hers, and Emma's resolve hardened like steel. "I promise, sweetheart," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt, ducking under the awning of a closed boutique to catch their breath. She knelt down to Lily's eye level, brushing wet strands of dark hair from the child's face. The little girl couldn't be more than 5, dressed in a pink coat that probably cost more than Emma made in a week. There was something about her, an innocence, a purity that reminded Emma of herself at that age, before life had taught her that kindness was often a luxury she couldn't afford. But today she was choosing to be rich in the only way that mattered. The memory of her mother's voice echoed in her mind like a prayer. "Emma, baby, kindness is the only thing that makes us human. Everything else is just noise." Those words had been spoken 15 years ago on her deathbed, but they still carried the weight of gospel truth. Emma's chest tightened with a familiar ache, the same one she felt every time she chose safety over courage, practicality over compassion. Not today. Today, she was going to be the person her mother raised her to be, even if it cost her everything she thought she needed. Thunder crashed overhead, and Lily jumped, instinctively wrapping her small arms around Emma's neck. The gesture was so pure, so trusting, that Emma felt tears mixing with the raindrops on her cheeks. She'd never been anyone's hero before. Hell, she could barely save herself most days. But something about this moment, this scared little girl who'd chosen her as a safe harbor, made Emma feel like maybe she was meant for something more than scanning barcodes and folding clearance items. Maybe this was her chance to matter, to make a real difference in someone's life. "Don't worry, Angel," Emma whispered against Lily's hair, the endearment slipping out naturally. "I've got you. We're going to find your daddy, okay?" She stood up, hefting the child into her arms despite her own petite frame, feeling a surge of protective strength she didn't know she possessed. The rain was letting up slightly, but the storm inside Emma's chest was just beginning. She could see her reflection in the boutique window, a young woman with determination blazing in her green eyes, holding a child like she was carrying the most precious cargo in the world. Her phone buzzed again. Probably another text from Carter threatening disciplinary action. Emma pulled it out with one hand, seeing 3 missed calls and a message that made her stomach drop. "Where are you? Get back here now or you're fired." The screen went black as the battery died, and Emma almost laughed at the irony. Here she was, watching her carefully constructed life fall apart in real time, and all she could think about was getting this little girl home safely. Maybe she was crazy. Maybe this was the stupidest decision she'd ever made, but for the first time in years, Emma felt truly alive. The rain began to ease as they stepped back onto the sidewalk, and Emma noticed a piece of paper peeking out from Lily's coat pocket. An address, written in careful handwriting, was barely visible through the plastic bag someone had thoughtfully wrapped it in. Emma's heart leaped. This was it, their beacon of hope in the storm. As they walked toward what she hoped was Lily's home, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking toward something much bigger than just returning a lost child. She was walking toward her destiny, even if that destiny meant losing everything she thought she wanted. Because sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of unexpected kindness, and sometimes helping a stranger find their way home is exactly how you find yourself. But as they approached the address on that crumpled piece of paper, Emma had no idea that the man waiting behind that door would change her life forever, and that her act of kindness was about to cost her everything she thought she needed, while giving her something she never knew she wanted. 3 hours earlier, Emma's alarm had screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 2 years. She'd rolled out of her twin bed in the cramped studio apartment, her feet hitting the cold linoleum floor with the resignation of someone who'd long since given up on dreams. The coffee maker gurgled to life while she stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Dark circles under green eyes that used to sparkle with ambition, now dulled by the endless cycle of work, bills, and more work. Her mother's medical debt collectors had called 3 times yesterday alone, their voices sharp with barely contained threats about credit scores and legal action. This job at Henderson's wasn't just employment, it was her lifeline, her only shot at staying afloat in a world that seemed determined to drown her. Henderson's department store squatted on Fifth Avenue like a tired old giant, its fluorescent lights buzzing with the kind of persistent annoyance that made your teeth ache. Emma had clocked in at exactly 8:00 a.m., not a minute late. Never a minute late, not if she wanted to keep Mr. Carter happy. The man ruled his retail kingdom with the iron fist of someone who'd never learned that power and respect weren't the same thing. "Time is money, people!" He'd bark at the morning huddle, his beady eyes scanning for any sign of weakness, any excuse to flex his authority. Emma had watched 3 co-workers get fired in the past month for infractions as minor as taking too long on bathroom breaks. She couldn't afford to be next. The morning shift dragged like molasses in January, each customer interaction a delicate dance of forced smiles and swallowed pride. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but our return policy clearly states..." Emma had started to explain to an angry woman clutching a clearly worn sweater, only to be cut off by a stream of profanity that would make sailors blush. She'd nodded and smiled, processed the return anyway, because fighting back meant complaints, and complaints meant write-ups, and write-ups meant unemployment. Her co-worker Jessica caught her eye from across the accessories counter, shaking her head with the weary solidarity of someone who understood that dignity was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Emma, you're on Register 3 today." Carter's voice had cut through her thoughts like nails on a chalkboard. "And remember, I want those sales numbers up, those lines moving, and 0 personal drama. You understand me?" His words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats, each one designed to remind her exactly how replaceable she was. Emma had nodded dutifully, knowing that personal drama meant everything from sick days to bathroom breaks that lasted longer than 2 minutes. She'd tried calling in sick once last month, when the flu had her barely able to stand, only to be told that commitment means showing up when it's inconvenient. So she'd worked through fever and chills, because rent didn't care about her health. The lunch rush came and went in a blur of scanning barcodes and counting change, Emma's hands moving on autopilot while her mind wandered to the notebook hidden in her locker. Inside those pages lived her real dreams, sketches of clothing designs, business plans for her own boutique, ideas for a life that felt bigger than these four walls. She'd majored in fashion design before life knocked her sideways, before medical bills and reality forced her to trade creativity for survival. Sometimes, during her 15-minute breaks, she'd flip through those pages and remember what hope felt like. But hope didn't pay bills, and dreams didn't keep the lights on. "You know what your problem is, Emma?" Jessica had said during their shared lunch break, unwrapping a sandwich that looked like it had seen better days. "You're too nice for this place. This job'll chew you up and spit you out if you don't learn to be a little selfish." Emma had laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. Being nice was all she had left of the person her mother had raised her to be. Without that, what was she? Just another face in the crowd, another body filling a uniform, another cog in Henderson's soul-crushing machine. The thought terrified her more than poverty ever could. The afternoon brought its own special hell, a busload of teenagers on a field trip, their energy and laughter a stark contrast to the store's oppressive atmosphere. Emma watched them through the windows, remembering when she'd been their age, full of plans and possibilities, believing that kindness and hard work were enough to build a good life. One girl, maybe 16 with paint-stained fingers, caught her eye and smiled. For a moment Emma saw herself in that young face, the girl who'd believed she could change the world, one design at a time, the girl who died somewhere between her mother's funeral and her first overdue notice. As the clock crept toward 3:30, Emma felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten. 3 more hours of scanning, smiling, and slowly dying inside. She'd started counting the minutes until closing time, then the hours until her next day off, then the months until... What? There was no end goal anymore, no light at the end of the tunnel, just an endless cycle of surviving until the next paycheck. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days helping other people find what they were looking for, while she remained completely lost herself. The question that haunted her quiet moments pressed against her consciousness like a bruise. Is this really all there is? But then, at exactly 3:27 p.m., everything changed. A small voice, barely above a whisper, had cut through the store's ambient noise like a prayer. "Excuse me, lady, I can't find my daddy." And Emma had looked down to see the most beautiful little girl she'd ever encountered. Dark curls, framing a heart-shaped face, brown eyes wide with fear and trust in equal measure. The child wore a pink coat that probably cost more than Emma's monthly salary, but it was her expression that stopped Emma's world cold. This wasn't just any lost child. This was a little girl who needed someone to care, someone to see her as more than just another problem to solve. And in that moment, Emma realized she was standing at a crossroads that would define not just her afternoon, but the entire trajectory of her life. Little did Emma know that this frightened little girl would become the catalyst for everything she'd been too afraid to reach for, and that sometimes the most important choices we make happen in the space between heartbeats, when logic fails and the heart takes the wheel. Emma Catherine Morrison had turned 24 just 3 weeks ago, but she felt ancient in all the ways that mattered. Standing barely 5'3" in her worn sneakers, she moved through the world with the cautious grace of someone who'd learned early that life had sharp edges and unforgiving corners. Her auburn hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, caught the fluorescent lights in a way that reminded people she'd once been the kind of girl who turned heads before exhaustion dulled her shine, and worry lines carved themselves around eyes that used to dance with possibility. She was a sunflower trying to bloom in a basement, reaching desperately toward any scrap of light she could find, even as the weight of responsibility bent her stem toward the ground. The notebook tucked away in her employee locker held the remnants of who she used to be, pages and pages of fashion sketches that spoke of a creativity that refused to die, no matter how hard life tried to bury it. Each drawing was a small rebellion, a whispered promise to herself that this wasn't the end of her story. There were designs for flowing dresses that would make women feel beautiful, sharp blazers that would give them confidence, casual wear that married comfort with style in ways the fashion world hadn't quite figured out yet. Her professors at Seattle Institute of Fashion had called her work intuitive and emotionally resonant, but those compliments felt like echoes from another lifetime now, muffled by the constant noise of bills and responsibilities. Her childhood had been painted in watercolor memories of her mother, Sarah, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after Emma's father disappeared when she was 7. "Baby girl," Sarah would say, her voice soft with exhaustion after 14-hour days. "Kindness is the only currency that really matters. You can be broke and still be rich if you've got a good heart." Those words had shaped Emma's core, even as they sometimes felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Sarah had been a force of nature, a woman who'd give her last dollar to a stranger in need, who'd taught Emma that character was measured not by what you had, but by what you were willing to give. The cancer had come like a thief in the night, stealing Sarah's strength one treatment at a time. Emma had dropped out of school in her junior year, trading her dreams for a caregiver's exhaustion, holding her mother's hand through chemo sessions that left them both hollowed out and hoping for miracles that never came. "Don't you dare quit your dreams for me," Sarah had whispered during one of her last lucid moments, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. But how could Emma focus on fabric swatches and runway shows when the most important person in her world was disappearing? The guilt of wanting to return to school, even as her mother lay dying, had eaten at her like acid. After the funeral, Emma had tried to pick up the pieces, but life had other plans. The medical bills arrived like a tsunami of numbers she couldn't comprehend. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for treatments that hadn't worked, for hope that had been packaged and sold at premium prices. Her mother's meager life insurance barely covered the burial costs, leaving Emma drowning in debt before she'd even finished grieving. The house they'd shared, filled with memories and her mother's laughter, had been foreclosed on 6 months later. Emma had packed her life into 3 suitcases and moved into the studio apartment that barely qualified as a closet. But at least the walls were hers to cry against. Henderson's had been her lifeline and her prison for 2 years now, a job that paid just enough to keep her head above water, but not enough to actually swim toward shore. She'd applied for dozens of positions in fashion, graphic design, anything creative, but without a degree, and with a gap in her resume, doors slammed shut faster than she could knock. "We'll keep your information on file," became the soundtrack to her disappointment, each rejection another nail in the coffin of her ambitions. So she'd learned to smile at customers who treated her like furniture, to bite her tongue when Carter belittled her, to swallow her pride with every "yes, sir" and "right away, ma'am." But beneath the resignation, beneath the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like winter cold, a spark still flickered. Emma would catch herself humming while she folded clothes, her hands automatically arranging displays with an eye for color and texture that couldn't be trained out of her. During her lunch breaks, she'd people watch, mentally redesigning their outfits, imagining how a simple change in silhouette or color could transform not just their look, but their entire attitude. Fashion wasn't just about clothes for Emma. It was about armor, about helping people become the best version of themselves, about the magic that happened when someone looked in the mirror and loved what they saw. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. Emma had lost touch with most of her college friends, partly from shame about her circumstances and partly because their lives had moved forward while hers felt stuck in amber. Friday nights found her eating cereal for dinner while scrolling through their social media posts. Engagement announcements, job promotions, vacation photos that sparkled with the kind of joy she barely remembered feeling. She'd learned to be her own best friend and worst enemy, the voice in her head alternating between encouragement and cruel honesty. "You're stronger than you think," it would whisper some days. "You're wasting your life," it would hiss on others. Yet, when Lily had appeared in front of her that afternoon, something had shifted inside Emma's chest. The little girl's trust, so pure and immediate, had awakened something that Emma thought might be dead. The part of her that believed in happy endings, in the power of small gestures to change everything. "You have kind eyes," Lily had said, and those 4 words had cracked open something in Emma's heart that she'd been protecting for years. Maybe kindness wasn't a weakness after all. Maybe her mother's lessons hadn't been naive idealism, but profound wisdom. As Emma knelt down to take Lily's small hand, she felt like she was finally meeting herself again. The girl who'd once believed she could design a better world, one stitch at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that girl wasn't as lost as she'd thought. But as Emma made the split-second decision to leave everything behind for a stranger's child, she had no idea that this single act of courage would set in motion a series of events that would test every lesson her mother had taught her about kindness, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be rich in the ways that matter. The Seattle streets stretched before them like a maze of uncertainty, each corner bringing new challenges that Emma hadn't anticipated when she'd made her impulsive decision to help. The rain had intensified, turning from a gentle drizzle into a proper Pacific Northwest downpour that soaked through her thin work cardigan within minutes. Lily's small hand felt like ice in hers, and Emma realized with growing panic that she had no umbrella, no car, and no real plan beyond find this child's father. Her phone had died completely now, leaving them cut off from any chance of calling for help or backup. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd gone from retail worker to guardian of someone's precious child in the span of heartbeats. "I'm cold," Lily whispered, her teeth chattering as they huddled under the narrow awning of a closed coffee shop. Emma's heart clenched at the vulnerability in that small voice, and she immediately shrugged out of her cardigan, wrapping it around the little girl's shoulders, despite the fact that it left her own arms exposed to the bitter wind. The gesture was automatic, born from the same instinct that had made her mother give up her own coat on cold nights so Emma could be warm. But now, standing in her thin work blouse with goosebumps racing across her skin, Emma wondered if her kindness was actually putting them both in danger. What if Lily got sick? What if this mysterious father blamed Emma for not keeping his daughter safe? Back at Henderson's, Emma knew her absence had been noticed, probably within the first 10 minutes of her disappearance. She could picture Carter's face turning that particular shade of red he reserved for his most spectacular rages, his thick fingers drumming against the register counter as he counted the minutes until he could unleash his wrath. Jessica would be covering her register along with her own, probably fielding questions about where Emma had gone while silently cursing her friend's bleeding heart. The afternoon rush would be hitting soon. The after-school crowd, the early commuters, all the people who expected service with a smile, regardless of how understaffed they were. Emma's stomach twisted with guilt and dread, knowing that every minute she spent away was another nail in the coffin of her employment. The city seemed hostile in a way Emma had never noticed before, every stranger's glance feeling like a judgment, every honking car horn making Lily flinch closer to her side. A businessman in an expensive suit looked them up and down with obvious disdain, his eyes taking in Emma's wrinkled uniform and Lily's tear-streaked face before he quickened his pace to get away from whatever drama they represented. An elderly woman at a bus stop shook her head disapprovingly, probably assuming Emma was some teenage mother who couldn't control her child. The weight of their stares made Emma's cheeks burn with shame. She looked exactly like what she was, a nobody with no business trying to solve problems this big. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice small and scared as they turned onto Pine Street. Emma's throat closed up because she didn't have a good answer. The address on the paper was for somewhere in the Capitol Hill district, but without her phone's GPS, she was navigating by street signs and half-remembered geography from her college days. Every wrong turn meant more time in the rain, more minutes away from work, more chances for something to go catastrophically wrong. She'd never felt more out of her depth, more aware of her own limitations and the massive scope of what she'd taken on. This wasn't like helping a customer find the right size. This was someone's child, someone's entire world, and Emma was flying blind. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was walking through some of the most expensive neighborhoods in Seattle, past boutiques and galleries that represented everything she'd once dreamed of being part of, while looking like a drowned rat in a discount store uniform. The windows displayed the kind of clothes she used to sketch in her notebook, elegant, sophisticated pieces that cost more than she made in a month. A mannequin in one window wore a dress that was almost identical to something she'd designed in her sophomore portfolio, and the sight hit her like a physical blow. Here she was, 24 years old and further from her dreams than ever, playing babysitter to a stranger's child while her career went up in flames. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she'd skipped lunch to work through a particularly nasty rush of returns. Lily looked up at her with those enormous brown eyes, and Emma realized the child was probably hungry too. But her wallet held exactly $12.37. Not enough for a cab, not enough for a decent meal, barely enough for a couple of granola bars from a vending machine. The practical voice in her head, the one that sounded suspiciously like her mother, whispered that she should find a police station, turn Lily over to the authorities, and pray she could get back to work before Carter made her unemployment official. It would be the smart thing to do, the responsible thing. But then Lily stumbled slightly, and Emma automatically swept her up into her arms, feeling the child's head settle against her shoulder with the trust of someone who'd decided Emma was safe. "My daddy's gonna be so worried," Lily murmured against Emma's neck, and the pain in those words cut straight to Emma's core. She thought about her own childhood, about the terror she'd felt the one time she'd gotten separated from her mother at a department store. The panic, the certainty that she'd never see home again, the way her mother's hug had felt like salvation when they'd finally found each other. Emma wouldn't let this little girl feel that fear for 1 second longer than necessary. The rain began to ease slightly as they finally reached the address, a sleek, high-rise building that screamed money and privilege. Emma's wet sneakers squeaked against the marble lobby floor, and she caught a glimpse of herself in the polished surface, a bedraggled young woman carrying a child who clearly didn't belong to her, both of them looking like they'd been pulled through a car wash. The doorman's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline, his expression making it clear that people like Emma didn't usually darken these particular doors. But Lily perked up in her arms, pointing excitedly at the elevator bank. "That's where Daddy lives!" she exclaimed, and Emma felt a surge of relief so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. They'd made it, against all odds, despite every obstacle. They'd actually made it. Now came the hard part, explaining to a complete stranger why his daughter was in the arms of a soaking wet department store clerk instead of safely at school where she belonged. But as the elevator climbed toward the penthouse, Emma had no idea that the man waiting behind that door would see her not as the desperate, rain-soaked mess she appeared to be, but as something far more precious, an angel who'd brought his world back to him when he'd thought it was lost forever. The penthouse door opened before Emma could even knock, as if the man behind it had been waiting by the window, watching for any sign of his missing daughter. Ethan Mitchell stood in the doorway like something out of a magazine, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention even in casual clothes. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours, and his grey eyes held a mixture of relief and panic that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. But it was the way his entire body sagged with thanksgiving when he saw Lily that made her realize just how terrified this powerful man had been. "Oh God, baby girl," he whispered, his voice breaking on the endearment as he reached for his daughter with hands that trembled like leaves. "Daddy!" Lily launched herself from Emma's arms into her father's embrace with the absolute trust that only children possess, and Emma watched as this composed businessman crumbled into pure parental love. He held his daughter like she was made of spun glass, his face buried in her hair as he murmured words that sounded like prayers of gratitude. Emma stood there dripping on his expensive hardwood floors, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this private moment of reunion. The contrast between them was stark. Him in his tailored shirt and perfectly pressed pants, her in her soggy uniform with mascara probably streaking down her cheeks. She started to back toward the elevator, ready to slip away quietly and let them have their moment. "Wait," Ethan's voice stopped her, and when he looked up, Emma saw something in his eyes that she'd never encountered before. Genuine, overwhelming gratitude directed at her. "Please, don't go. You brought her home." He shifted Lily to one arm, never fully releasing her, and extended his other hand toward Emma. "I'm Ethan Mitchell, and I owe you everything. You have no idea what you've done for me today." His handshake was firm and warm, and Emma felt like she was being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. Not as a retail worker or a problem to be solved, but as a person who mattered, who'd done something that couldn't be measured in dollars or productivity metrics. "I'm Emma," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper as she took in the penthouse around them. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, and the furniture looked like it belonged in an art museum rather than someone's home. Everything was sleek, modern, expensive, a world so far removed from her studio apartment that it might as well have been on another planet. "I work at Henderson's department store. That's where I found Lily. She was lost and scared, and I couldn't just—" Emma trailed off, realizing how inadequate words were to explain the pull she'd felt, the absolute certainty that she needed to help this child no matter the cost. Ethan's expression shifted as he took in her appearance. The soaked uniform, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she was trying to make herself smaller in his opulent living room. "You left work to bring her home," he said, and it wasn't a question. There was something almost awed in his voice, as if he couldn't quite believe such kindness existed in the world. "In this weather, without knowing where you were going or who I was. You just helped her because she needed help." Emma nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her soggy sneakers squeaking against his floors. She caught a glimpse of herself in one of his modern mirrors and winced. She looked like exactly what she was, a broke retail worker who'd made an impulsive decision that was probably going to cost her everything. "Daddy, she's an angel," Lily announced, with the matter-of-fact certainty that children possessed. "She gave me her sweater and carried me when I got tired, and she promised to take me home." The little girl's words hit Emma like a physical force, bringing tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. She wasn't used to being anyone's hero, wasn't used to having her actions described with such pure appreciation. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Kindness is never wasted, baby girl. It always comes back to you when you need it most." But standing here in this palace of success, Emma felt more aware than ever of how different their worlds were. Ethan studied Emma with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. She could see him taking inventory, her youth, her obvious financial struggles, the way she held herself like someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. "You're shivering," he observed, immediately moving toward what looked like a designer coat closet. "Here, take this." He pulled out a cashmere wrap that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent and held it out to her. "Please, you're soaked through." The gesture was so natural, so genuinely caring, that Emma felt her defenses start to crumble. When was the last time someone had noticed her comfort, had wanted to take care of her instead of the other way around? "I should go," Emma said, even as she gratefully accepted the warmth of the wrap. Her phone was dead, but she knew what time it was without looking. Well past the point where Carter would have moved from angry to absolutely livid. Every minute she spent in this beautiful apartment was another step toward unemployment, another dollar lost from her already precarious finances. "I've been gone from work for hours now. My boss is probably—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the reality that her act of kindness was likely to cost her the job she desperately needed. The irony was bitter. She'd tried to save someone else and might have doomed herself in the process. But Ethan wasn't letting her go that easily. He pulled a business card from his wallet, but not before Emma caught a glimpse of what looked like several $100 bills tucked inside. The casual wealth on display made her stomach clench with a familiar mix of envy and resignation. "This has my private number," he said, pressing the card into her hand. "I want to do something for you, to thank you properly for what you've done. Dinner, at least. You saved my daughter, Emma. You brought her home when she was lost and scared, and you did it without knowing anything about us, except that she needed help." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel dizzy. That kind of goodness deserves to be rewarded. Emma stared down at the elegant card in her hands. Thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering that read, "Ethan Mitchell, CEO, Mitchell Industries." The weight of it seemed to represent everything she wasn't, everything she'd never be. A CEO and a department store clerk. It sounded like the setup to a joke, except Emma couldn't find the punchline. As she rode the elevator back down to the marble lobby, the business card felt like it was burning a hole in her palm. She'd entered this building as a nobody who'd made an impulsive decision, but somehow, in the space of 20 minutes, everything had shifted. Ethan Mitchell had looked at her like she mattered, like her kindness was something rare and precious, rather than a weakness to be exploited. But as the elevator descended towards street level, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was falling back to earth from a dream, and the landing was going to hurt more than she could imagine. Little did Emma know that the business card tucked in her palm would become her lifeline to a world she'd never dared imagine. But first, she'd have to survive the storm waiting for her back at Henderson's, where Mr. Carter's fury was about to teach her that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you think you can't afford to lose. 3 days had passed since Emma's world had been turned upside down by a little girl's trust and a powerful man's gratitude. She sat in Café Luna, a cozy corner spot in Pike Place Market, nervously smoothing her best dress, a simple black number that she'd bought for her mother's funeral and hadn't worn since. Ethan had called the morning after Lily's rescue, his voice warm but formal, as he'd insisted on taking her to dinner as a proper thank you. Emma had almost declined, overwhelmed by the gulf between their worlds, but something in his tone, a loneliness that echoed her own, had made her say yes. Now, waiting for him to arrive, she felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. "Sorry I'm late." Ethan's voice cut through her anxious thoughts as he slipped into the seat across from her. He looked different outside his penthouse, still polished and expensive, but somehow more human in his dark jeans and navy sweater. The stress lines around his eyes had softened since their first meeting, and Emma realized he'd probably been carrying the weight of Lily's disappearance like a physical burden. "I had to read 3 bedtime stories and promise to check for monsters under the bed twice before Lily would let me leave," he said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "She's been asking about you non-stop. When is the angel lady coming to visit? Does she like butterflies? Can she come live with us?" Emma felt her cheeks flush at the idea of Lily thinking about her, asking questions, wanting her around. It had been so long since anyone had looked forward to her presence that the concept felt foreign and wonderful. "She's incredible," Emma said softly, remembering the child's fearless trust, her matter-of-fact announcement that Emma was an angel. "So brave for someone so little. You must be so proud of her." She watched as Ethan's expression shifted, love and pain warring across his features in a way that made her heart ache. There was a story there, shadows behind his eyes that spoke of loss and protective instincts stretched thin. "Her mother died when she was 2, Ethan said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on the table between them. "Cancer, swift and merciless and completely unfair. Lily doesn't really remember her, which breaks my heart and relieves me at the same time. It's just been the 2 of us for 3 years now, figuring it out as we go." His voice carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Business trips cut short, board meetings rescheduled around parent-teacher conferences and pediatrician appointments. Emma saw him clearly then, not just the successful CEO, but the single father doing his best to be everything his daughter needed. The parallel to her own loss hit Emma like a physical blow. "My mom died of cancer too," she found herself saying, the words spilling out before she could stop them. 2 years ago. The bills—" She trailed off, but Ethan nodded with understanding that needed no explanation. They sat in shared silence for a moment, 2 people who'd learned too young that life had sharp teeth and no mercy for the innocent. But there was comfort in being understood without having to explain, in sitting across from someone who knew that grief was a country with no exit visa. "Tell me about your drawings," Ethan said, gently steering the conversation toward safer ground. Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't mentioned her sketches to him. "Lily said you had pictures in a book when you were carrying her. She said they were beautiful like princess dresses." Ah, his smile was encouraging, genuinely curious, and Emma felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. When was the last time someone had asked about her dreams, had wanted to hear about her hopes, instead of just her availability to work extra shifts? Emma found herself pulling her phone out, scrolling to the pictures she'd taken of her latest designs, sketches she'd worked on during her lunch breaks, ideas that came to her at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. "I studied fashion design," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before everything. These are just silly ideas now, things I doodle when I'm bored." But as she handed him her phone, she watched his face carefully, afraid to hope, but unable to stop herself from wanting his approval. Her designs meant everything to her, and nothing to the world, until now. Ethan studied each image with the focused attention he probably brought to million-dollar contracts, and Emma held her breath, waiting for polite dismissal or patronizing encouragement. Instead, his eyebrows rose with what looked like genuine amazement. "These are incredible, Emma. The way you blend classic elements with modern sensibilities. This one here?" He pointed to a sketch of a wrap dress that managed to be both professional and feminine. "This could revolutionize business wear for women. And this evening gown, it's got more sophistication than anything I've seen on a red carpet." His praise felt like sunshine on her soul, warm and nourishing after years of creative starvation. "You really think they're good?" Emma asked, hating how needy she sounded, but unable to contain her hope. For 2 years, her dreams had lived in a box, buried under bills and exhaustion, and the constant voice that said practical people didn't chase fantasies. But here was Ethan Mitchell, a man who'd built an empire from nothing, looking at her work like it mattered. "I mean, they're just sketches. I don't have the resources to actually make anything, and without finishing my degree..." She was rambling, making excuses, but Ethan held up a hand to stop her. "Emma," he said, his voice serious in a way that made her pay attention, "promise me something. Don't ever call your talent just anything. What you've created here is art that could change how people feel about themselves when they get dressed every morning. That's not small or insignificant, that's powerful." As he spoke, Emma's phone buzzed with a text message that made her stomach drop. It was from Jessica. "Carter fired you officially today. Cleared out your locker. I'm so sorry, Em. Call me." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, reality crashing back into their bubble of possibility like a wrecking ball. She was unemployed, behind on rent, with no prospects and no safety net except the kindness of a man who lived in a world she'd never belonged to. The fairy tale was over before it had really begun, and Emma felt herself falling back toward earth with devastating clarity. But as Emma stared at the message that confirmed her worst fears, she had no idea that Ethan was about to make an offer that would change everything, or that accepting his help would thrust her into a world where her biggest dreams and deepest insecurities would battle for control of her destiny. The silence in Henderson's was suffocating as Emma walked through the store's main floor, every step heavier than the last. She'd returned soaked and breathless, hoping for some kind of understanding, but Mr. Carter was waiting, arms crossed, jaw clenched, with a look that could crack glass. He didn't even wait for her to speak. "You think you can disappear during your shift and come back like nothing happened?" His voice echoed through the store like a slap. All eyes turned to her. Customers, co-workers, even Jessica froze in place. There was a lost child," Emma stammered, her voice barely rising above the fluorescent hum. "I had to make sure she got home safe. I didn't mean to..." But Carter cut her off with a sneer. "Save it. You're fired. And just so everyone hears it, this is what happens when you think emotions matter more than rules." His words struck like lightning, and Emma felt her chest cave in, her breath caught between shame and disbelief. Tears blurred her vision as she turned away, the sound of her co-worker's silence louder than any judgmental whisper. Her cheeks burned as she walked past Jessica, who reached out, but Emma pulled away. She couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes. Outside, the cold air hit like a punch to the lungs. She had nothing, no job, no safety net, no plan. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, trembling and faint. Kindness always finds its way back to you. But right now, all she felt was alone. That's when she saw him, Ethan, standing beside his sleek black car, leaning against it like something out of a different world. His eyes met hers, and in them there was no judgment, just quiet understanding. "I had a feeling you'd come here first," he said gently, stepping toward her. "I know what happened." Emma couldn't hold it in anymore. Her shoulders shook with sobs, and Ethan, without hesitation, pulled her into an embrace. The kind that didn't ask for permission, just offered shelter. "I lost everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Ethan pulled back slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. "Emma, maybe that job wasn't who you were to begin with." She shook her head, trembling. "I need to work. I need money. Dreams don't pay bills." And then softer, "Not everyone has a penthouse to fall back on." Ethan didn't flinch. He nodded like he understood every word. "That's why I want you to come work for me," he said simply. Emma blinked, stunned. "At Mitchell Industries." Her voice cracked between disbelief and fear. "Doing what? I'm just me." Ethan smiled, but there was nothing patronizing about it. "Exactly. You see what others miss. You act when most people freeze. And your designs? They're better than half my boardroom's ideas combined. You have vision, Emma. Let me help you build something real." But the whispers had already started. As news of her connection to Ethan spread, somehow faster than the rain, the internet did what it does best. Retail girl seduces CEO. From racks to riches. Another gold digger story? Emma saw the headlines, felt the stares when she walked through the lobby of his building. She heard Victoria's voice behind closed doors, dripping with disdain. "She's just playing him." And those words clung to her like thorns. "I don't belong in your world," Emma said one evening, her voice brittle, eyes tired. Ethan had invited her to a strategy meeting, and she'd spent the entire day being measured and dismissed by sleek, polished executives. "They look at me like I'm trash you forgot to throw out." Ethan's jaw tensed. "Then we show them who you are." But the doubt had rooted deep in Emma's heart. Even Lily's drawings pinned to her fridge couldn't drown the noise. Still, beneath the weight of it all, something flickered in Emma's eyes. Not pride, not yet, but defiance. And as she stood in front of the towering windows of Ethan's office, the city lights casting her shadow on the floor, she asked herself the question that had haunted her for years. What if I really tried? But just as that hope began to rise, the storm brewing in the office halls threatened to swallow her again. And this time, it would strike where it hurt most, her dignity. The first morning at Mitchell Industries felt like stepping into another universe. The lobby gleamed like a crystal palace, all marble floors and golden elevators. Emma adjusted her borrowed blazer, one size too big, sleeves rolled up, trying to hide the way her hands shook. As she waited for her badge photo, she caught her reflection in the glass. Out of place, too soft around the edges, eyes full of fear, pretending to be brave. "What am I doing here?" she thought. "I'm not like them. I don't speak their language." Her assigned desk was in the creative division, tucked beside towering egos with sleek hair and even sleeker attitudes. "So you're her," someone whispered behind a glass mug of oat milk latte. Emma forced a smile, but her chest tightened. Every time she reached for her notebook or offered a suggestion, someone rolled their eyes or talked over her. She wasn't just the new girl. She was the girl Ethan brought in, and no one was willing to let her forget it. Her first week was a blur of meetings where she barely spoke and silent lunches alone in the cafeteria. Once she offered an idea for a rebranding slogan, only to have Victoria, the ice queen of the office, snatch it, tweak a word, and present it as her own. Emma didn't argue. She was still trying to learn the rules of this unfamiliar game, and from what she'd seen, kindness wasn't exactly a winning strategy. Ethan checked in daily, casually, as if he wasn't the CEO of the company. He'd pass her desk with a wink or stop by with coffee, pretending it was coincidence. "You settling in okay?" he asked one afternoon, leaning against her cubicle with that half-smile that made her forget how to breathe. "Trying to," she replied, glancing at her laptop, "though I think I speak a different language than most people in here." Ethan tilted his head. "Then teach them your language, Emma." Inspired and tired of being invisible, she pulled out her old sketches one night after work, fingers flying across the tablet she could barely afford. She reimagined Mitchell's fashion division through her eyes. Bold, accessible, elegant, without arrogance. Then she built a pitch, frame by frame, breathing life into ideas no one had dared present before. Her working title, Everyday Grace. When she showed the concept to Ethan in private, his eyes lit up. "Emma," he murmured, scrolling through the slides, "this is fresh. This is you. We have a marketing summit next month. I want you to present this." Her stomach dropped. "In front of the board," she squeaked. He nodded, his gaze steady. "You belong in that room." But Emma wasn't so sure. Confidence was still a coat she hadn't learned to wear. Word of her involvement spread fast, and so did resentment. Victoria, icy and sharp in stilettos, smiled too sweetly every time she passed. One afternoon, Emma caught her whispering to a group of executives by the elevator. "She's sleeping her way up. Watch, she'll crash soon enough." Emma felt every syllable like a splinter in her chest, but instead of breaking, she walked away, head high, even if her eyes burned with unshed tears. At home, she collapsed onto her couch, Lily's butterfly drawing still taped to her fridge. "You're an angel," the little girl had said. That memory was her anchor. She replayed it whenever her insecurities got too loud. She wasn't in this world by accident. She had something to offer, something real. But climbing wasn't the hardest part. Staying up there, under scrutiny, under pressure, that was the true test. By the time the summit approached, Emma was different, not louder, not tougher, but clearer. Her voice still trembled sometimes, but it carried weight. She walked into that boardroom with her sketches tucked under her arm and a fire in her eyes. She had no pedigree, no degree on the wall, but she had something they didn't, a vision rooted in truth. And just as she stood to present, unaware that sabotage was brewing in the shadows, Emma smiled, because for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of who she was becoming. The summit room sparkled with tension. Executives in sharp suits filled every seat, murmuring over catered coffee while glancing at their watches. Emma stood at the front, her laptop connected, her presentation ready. But her palms were slick with sweat, and her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted out. "Breathe, Emma," she told herself. "You belong here. You've earned this." Ethan gave her a subtle nod from across the table. His presence steadied her, but didn't prepare her for what was about to unfold. She began to speak, her voice soft but sure, guiding the board through the campaign titled Everyday Grace. Slides filled the screen, models of different sizes, real stories, confident poses in clothes that moved with strength and beauty. The room grew quiet. Emma could feel the shift. People were listening. For the first time, she wasn't just the girl from retail. She was a voice, a creator. She ended her pitch with a line that silenced the air. "Style isn't for the elite. It's for anyone brave enough to show up as themselves." Applause came slow, then steady. Even the most skeptical executives nodded thoughtfully. Ethan looked proud, genuinely proud. But across the table, Victoria's smile was tight, too tight. She tilted her head and said sweetly, "Beautiful concept, Emma, but I do have a question. How exactly did you land this opportunity? Was it the designs or the dinners with the CEO?" The room froze. Emma blinked. Her hands stiffened at her sides. "What are you implying?" Ethan's voice cut through the tension like steel. Victoria leaned back, all poise and poison. "Come on, Ethan. Everyone's talking. She worked at a department store last week, and now she's front and center. You don't find that suspicious?" A ripple of murmurs swelled. Emma felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Her chest constricted, her mouth dried. "That's not fair," she managed. "I've worked hard. I earned this." But the damage had been done. Someone had leaked photos of them having coffee. Tabloids had twisted the story into clickbait headlines overnight. CEO falls for former clerk. From stockroom to boardroom romance. And now those whispers were knives. Ethan turned to her, his expression caught somewhere between fury and conflict. "Do you believe them?" she asked quietly, unable to mask the betrayal building in her chest. He hesitated. Just a second, but it was enough. The silence between them screamed louder than anything Victoria could have said. Emma stepped back, her voice trembling. "I risked everything for that little girl, for your daughter. I didn't ask for any of this." She glanced around the room, at the stairs, the judgment, the silence that didn't defend her. She reached into her bag, pulled out the elegant business card Ethan had once given her, and dropped it on the polished table. "You said I belonged here," she whispered. "But maybe I was just a project after all." Ethan stood, trying to speak, but Emma had already turned. Her heels echoed down the corridor as she disappeared behind the closing glass doors, leaving behind a campaign, a dream, and the man who couldn't defend her when it mattered most. Outside, the city pulsed with indifference. Rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Emma stood beneath an awning, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She'd lost everything, again. But this time, it wasn't grief that gutted her. It was disappointment, in them, in him, in herself, for daring to believe she was more than a story waiting to be mocked. And yet, as she reached into her coat pocket, her fingers brushed against a folded drawing, Lily's angel with wings like sunflowers. Emma clutched it to her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe they can take the title, the office, even the credit, but they can't take what's inside me. And with that, she walked into the storm, not realizing that her greatest test and her truest redemption was just around the corner. Emma hadn't planned on returning. Not to that building, not to that campaign, not to the man who'd hesitated when she needed him the most. But something in her wouldn't let it go. Not pride. No, this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about reclaiming what era dela. Quando recebeu uma mensagem anônima dizendo que sua campanha seria apresentada sem seu nome, ela soube, era agora ou nunca. Vestindo o único blazer que ainda não havia desbotado, Emma atravessou a entrada de Mitchell Industries com o coração disparado. Ela não tinha convite, nem crachá, nem aval, mas tinha coragem. "I need to speak with the board," ela disse à recepcionista. "It's urgent. Tell them Emma Morrison is here. They'll want to hear what I have to say." A mulher hesitou. "They're already in the presentation." Emma apertou os lábios. "Then I'll find my own way." Na sala de reuniões, Victoria estava em seu auge. Seu sorriso era afiado, os slides estavam no lugar e o título da campanha Everyday Grace brilhava na tela, sem o nome de Emma em lugar algum. Inclusive, ela dizia, tivemos que ajustar o conceito em cima da hora, pois certos arquivos foram perdidos misteriosamente. Os olhos de Ethan estavam fixos na tela, as mãos cruzadas, o maxilar travado. Algo ali não batia, mas antes que pudesse intervir, a porta se abriu. Emma entrou com passos decididos, cabelos soltos, olhos firmes, desenho de Lily nas mãos. "Sorry to interrupt," ela disse, voz serena, mas cheia de fogo. "But I believe you're about to pitch a lie." Um silêncio pesado tomou conta do ambiente. Victoria virou-se devagar, surpresa e irritada. "What is she doing here?" Emma ignorou. "You all know this campaign. You loved it, but what you don't know is who created it." Ela abriu o desenho de Lily e o colocou sobre a mesa. Anjo com asas de girassol, as palavras thank you escritas em letras infantis. "This," Emma disse, "is why I started, because one little girl believed in me when no one else did. These sketches, this vision, came from me. And I don't care if I'm fired again, but I won't let someone else rewrite my story." Victoria tentou cortar. "This is ridiculous." Mas Ethan levantou-se com força. "Enough!" Sua voz reverberou. Ele olhou para Emma, depois para os demais. "Everything she just said is true. Victoria accessed Emma's files and erased her name. She stole her work, and I stayed silent for too long. Ele se virou para Emma. I'm sorry. Truly, you deserved more than my silence. Emma sentiu o peso do momento. Não era apenas sobre a campanha. Era sobre todos os dias em que ficou quieta, todos os momentos em que duvidou de si mesma. You could have spoken sooner, ela disse firme. But thank you for speaking now. O conselho olhou em volta, atônito. Um murmúrio de respeito começou a crescer. Pela primeira vez, eles a viam. No final da reunião, Victoria foi dispensada imediatamente. Ethan insistiu que Emma reassumisse o projeto, mas ela recusou, por enquanto. I need time, ela disse, to rebuild on my own terms. Ele assentiu sem tentar convencer. Dessa vez, ele entendera e respeitaria. Na saída, Emma parou sozinha no hall de entrada, olhando o reflexo no vidro. Não era mais a garota do estoque, nem a vítima, nem a exceção. Era uma mulher que tinha sobrevivido ao furacão e reaprendido a voar com as próprias asas. E ao seu redor, uma cidade inteira ainda por conquistar. Mas antes de virar a esquina, ouviu uma voz suave às suas costas. Emma! Era Lily, com um sorriso imenso, correndo até ela. Did you get your wings back? Emma se ajoelhou, os olhos brilhando. Yeah, sweetheart, ela sussurrou. I think I did. E então, com o desenho apertado ao peito, Emma caminhou em direção ao que viria a seguir. Livre, forte e pronta. Emma didn't rush. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself space. Space to breathe, to think, to feel. She spent days in parks with her sketchbook, letting the sunlight find her again. No deadlines, no judgmental stares, just her pencil dancing freely across paper. The designs had changed. They weren't about survival anymore. They were about joy, about power, about becoming. Mitchell Industries reached out twice. Then again, Ethan respected her silence, but his messages were warm, patient. No pressure, he said. Just wanted you to know. Your office is still waiting. But Emma wasn't the same girl who needed someone to hold the door open for her. This time, she walked through it when ela escolheu. And when ela voltou, foi como um plano. I'm not just a designer, she told the board in a new meeting. I'm a storyteller. I want to launch a full campaign, Everyday Grace, not just as a fashion line, but as a message. Inclusivity, honesty, strength. The executives were skeptical, until Emma pulled out real photos of women who'd inspired her wearing her sketches. Teachers, nurses, mothers. Let's sell real beauty, she said, and for once the room listened without a single interruption. Ethan watched her in awe. There was no fear in her this time. No need for him to step in. She stood on her own, steady, radiant. He waited until the meeting ended to speak with her. You're incredible, he said quietly, following her down the hallway. Emma smiled but didn't look back. Took me long enough to believe it, she replied, but I do now. That night, he invited her to dinner, not at a restaurant, on the rooftop of the office. The skyline glittered around them, a breeze soft against their faces. Ethan lit candles himself. You always wanted stars, he said, pointing upward. I figured we'd start with city lights and work our way up. Emma laughed, warm and unguarded. Is this your version of a fairy tale? He shook his head. This time it's not fiction. He took her hand. Emma, I'm sorry I doubted you. I let fear win. But I've learned more from you than any investor or board member. You fight with your heart. You make people feel seen. I love that. And I love you. The words floated into the night, soft but sure. Emma didn't flinch. She looked at him deeply and said, Then you better love all of me, my rules, my pace, and my dream. Their kiss was quiet, not rushed, full of history and hope. It wasn't a rescue. It was a meeting. Two people who had fallen apart in different ways now rising together, and as they sat side by side, Lily's laughter echoing from the corner where she played, Emma felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. A few weeks later, the Everyday Grace campaign launched. Emma's designs lit up billboards across the city. Soft fabrics, bold colors, real people. Her name signed every piece. One morning, she passed a poster of a woman in her wrap dress, standing tall with her baby on her hip. A stranger stopped beside her. I feel like that ad is talking to me, she said. Emma smiled, blinking back tears. That was the idea. She walked home that evening with a tote full of sketchbooks and a heart full of calm. Her success hadn't come overnight. It had come in pieces, in tears and rejections and brave decisions. She was no longer just surviving, she was becoming. And as she unlocked her apartment door, her sunflower-winged angel drawing still pinned above her desk, she whispered to herself, "Kindness is strength, and I finally see it." Months had passed since the day Emma chose to save more than just a child. She saved herself. On a sunny Sunday morning, she walked hand in hand with Ethan and Lily through the park, the same park where her mother used to take her as a little girl. Lily's laughter echoed through the trees like music, and Ethan's hand held hers with quiet strength. They looked like a family, and in every way that truly mattered, they were. She wore a dress of her own design, with tiny embroidered sunflowers along the hem, a soft reminder of everything that had grown from pain. In her bag, she carried a worn leather sketchbook, the same one that had followed her through every stage of her transformation. But today, she didn't open it to draw new outfits. Today, she opened it to write a letter to the little girl who changed everything. Dear Lily, thank you for reminding me that kindness is a superpower, and that sometimes angels come in unexpected ways. What no one knew, what Emma never told anyone out loud, was that with her first paycheck as creative director, she donated a generous sum to a children's shelter, quietly, anonymously. No credit, no recognition. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because she understood now what it meant to be seen, to be saved when you're at your lowest. As she and Ethan watched Lily chase butterflies, a memory played in Emma's mind like an old film, the moment she turned in her store badge, heartbroken and uncertain, never knowing that moment would mark the beginning of the life she'd always dreamed of. The Emma from back then would have never recognized the woman she had become, stronger, wiser, no longer apologizing for her light. Across the street, a massive billboard caught her eye. Her campaign, Everyday Grace for Women Who Choose Light, stretched across the skyline in bold letters. It was her vision, her story, her name. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she didn't need to prove herself to anyone, not anymore. "Do you still draw to escape the world?" Ethan asked her gently, his eyes tracing the outline of her smile. Emma laughed, soft and sure. "No," she said. "Now I draw to build it." He kissed her forehead with quiet reverence. Nearby, Lily ran toward them with two flowers clutched in her tiny hands, a daisy and a sunflower. "Look, Mommy," she said, "it's you and me." The camera lifts slowly into the sky as Emma kneels to hold Lily close. The sun casts a golden glow over the park, the city, the family, and the final narration echoes, warm and strong. Sometimes it takes a single act of kindness, one small choice, even if it costs you everything, to finally find yourself. Have you ever helped someone like that? Or been helped when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Thank you for following Emma's journey. May it inspire you to find light in the places no one thought to look.